No, it's not. No, there's nothing lively about his muscle tone at all. Absolutely. He's not worried about his ankles being long. He doesn't care that his snout's planted into the earth. His heartbeat is not a problem. His aorta is not a problem. Boobs, not a problem. Testicles. Whose term is chesticles? I've pinched that from somebody. Chesticles. Ah. I've got chesticles. I knew I'd got it from somewhere. My best material is all pinched.
Isn't everybody's? I said mine.
Yeah, you are our source, Glenn. I've often said that about you. Glenn, you are the source. S-O-U-R-C-E, not S-A-U-C-E. No, chop that. It's this fancy one that my son has to buy now. It's not just good old-fashioned sweet chili sauce. It's starts with an S. Took me ages finding it in the supermarket. Yeah. What's that? I called him a hipster. I just said, oh, you hipster. Buy it online, Eddie, I said. Right, so now I went through my files to see what I've got about muscle tone, and I found this. So let's go through. I thought, we'd just break it up a little bit because I've got a captive audience. And we'll talk about muscle tone. So this will be as what to say, an unknown journey for you as for me, because I haven't looked at this for a very long time. So let's just see what I thought about muscle tone. I won't tell you how many years ago that I did this workshop with Feldenkrais practitioners. I've done it from memory, I've done it a few times with Feldenkrais practitioners. So we'll see. So, sorry? Sure, yes. Yeah, and you can have the PowerPoint as well. I know, I'm not fussy. Well, let's see, we're reviewing it, right? If there's something that we don't agree with, because things change, that what I learnt about neurology. We had such a lively conversation that she's not coming back.
Good job.
Yeah, good job.
One by one.
One by one. Whoops. Yeah, it's like you're going to roll out the bed and little one said, oh, okay. So I can't take responsibility for that. Oh. Anyway, the conversation we were having was that developmental theory has changed completely since I was an undergrad at uni. Like completely. Like the theories of motor control that I were taught are simply dead in the water now. So whatever theory we're currently teaching, you have to hold on to pretty lightly. Like the bell hand is useful because you can let go as quickly as hold on to something, because that's how quickly things change, especially in my world. Now the behaviour, what we observe, stays the same. It's the theories behind it that change. As I said, Priscilla and I were talking, babies still get head control around 6 weeks. Babies still do this, that and the other. Or actually a really good example we didn't talk about in that ATM chapter at Elusive Obvious. There's that gorgeous little picture of the little boy, little baby who's got the head oriented up to the vertical. And he talks about that in terms of development of reflex head writing. That's dead. That language is gone. Head writing, no way. So under sort of the current theories of motor control and neurodevelopment, Feldenkrais was saying that's the development of the reflex, the so-called head writing reflexes. They don't exist anymore, right? So the baby still orients its head vertically. The way we explain it is different. The way we explain it now is through the exploration of the environment and the development of the senses. Because what you will feel intuitively when you do those ATMs, the world makes more sense when our eyes get an image that's on the same horizontal plane. So for a baby to develop this, the brain has to work really hard to make sense of this image. You'll do it, tip your head, like seriously tip your head. Now it's hard for us because it's unfamiliar, but it's hard because the images are difficult to figure out. If you orient to the horizontal, the image comes at each eye the same, doesn't it? Right? So if I do this image is coming here, this image is coming here, and they're very different. Here, they make more sense. The brain makes a decision that makes sense. So it maps the sensory input to the visual system to the muscle tone of the neck, because the way that I can ensure that my eyes are on the horizon is if I have equal tonus this side and this side, and that this makes more sense than this. It's actually better for the microphone as well. So it will map what makes sense, what's easier for it to compute, to a balance of tonus relative to the flexors and extensors of the neck. So it's this learning, and it's not explicit learning like that's conscious. The baby's not going, well, like me, I've just noticed that this makes more sense than this. It's not. It's really implicit learning, because the brain will make a decision that is easy for it, right? So we then map sensory, using the sensory input onto a nice repeatable pattern of action based on manipulating muscle tonus in the muscles around our neck. Hey presto, we get head writing, but it's not reflexive, right? It's not, it doesn't, because the problem with, if it was reflexive, it would happen inexorably. It would simply happen as a result of the nervous system maturing. And what we know, well, what we understand, we don't know it for sure, but what we infer is from pretty horrible circumstances is that babies who don't have the opportunity to use their eyes and move around in their environment don't develop that kind of head control at that time. So, and that some of the early evidence for that came from those poor little babies in Romania that were kept in cots and swaddled, wrapped up and not, there was always orphan babies, that orphan situation, where there was dozens and dozens of babies who were in this, so-called impoverished environment where they didn't have the opportunity to roll onto their tummies and have that experience of the world both not making sense and making sense. And this is a really important distinction, and why I think it matters that we don't think about reflex development anymore, because it has that inference that babies will develop anyway, no matter what happens to them. And that's injurious, because then it means it doesn't matter what environment babies are in. And this is so important that in the US they've legislated that it matters what environments babies are in, because it diminishes their learning opportunities, i.e. diminishes their development.
Is that chasing drug selective?
No, yes, probably. Because he'd just say, I don't even know what he says about child development. He probably just says all female babies must be drowned at birth or something. Yeah, where is he going to take us in the Dark Ages? But, oh, God. Anyway. He probably didn't get a chance to do anything, I would say. Yes. The box is coming. You're going to get your ears boxed. We love the box.
Didn't Feldenkrais sort of touch on this when he was talking about Margaret Mead, though, with some of her stuff in terms of what babies did and didn't do, and then what they couldn't do as adults?
Yeah,
so
he started to smell a rat in the hierarchical and reflex theories. He did start to smell a rat because he foreshadowed neuroplasticity, that the brain can change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that the brain is about learning. So you're absolutely right.
I wasn't trying to correct you.
No, I totally get what you're saying. So if you read his textbooks, there are some inconsistencies, because sometimes he's talking about things from that reflex hierarchical point of view, but then other times he's foreshadowing the revolution that happened in neurology. So he was really on the cusp. He was ahead of the cusp, ahead of the wave. It was something to do with the cusp and the wave. I don't know. He was ahead of the game. He was ahead of the cusp wave game. So that's one, and people, I can come across as a bit arrogant. I'll be arrogant about the current theory, but I'll change my mind next week when I read a new article. It's fine. I just like to argue. Anyway, so let's read that. Does that make sense anyway, getting back to the picture of the baby and the thing? Do you know what I'm talking about with my little bit? Maybe we need to talk about development theory a bit more. Do you want do another lecture? You're pretty non-committal about that. I think the answer to that is no. That's like no. What? Yeah. Box.
Sorry.
So good.
So does gravity have anything to do with that? Because
Yes.
I would have thought if there wasn't any gravity,
Yes.
and you kept lying on your side,
Yes.
your brain would just interpret everything,
Yes.
the world on its side, and
Yes.
that'd be okay.
Yes, and that's really another. The influence of gravity came in with sort of some of the in-between theories between the hierarchical and reflex theories and the sort of ultimate dynamic and action systems theories. Is, I think it was Bernstein or somebody started to say, hang on a minute, this development is not inexorable, it's not inevitable. And gravity plays its part. So the environment plays its part. So the so-called, the laws of gravity and physics play their part in the development of movement. It's not just the nervous system developing, in terms of one reflex comes and then the next one comes and extinguishes the previous one and all that, which is what the original theory said. And he's saying gravity makes a difference. And then Esther Thalen picked it up. She's one of the dynamic action theorists, because she showed that what we thought was sort of the stepping reflex that little newborns have. And the old theory said, well, that disappears because it gets supplanted by a higher order control in the brain. She showed, actually, no, it's just gravity. The baby gets too heavy to lift its legs. So, yes, gravity comes into it. And we use gravity to give us information about the environment. And we use gravity to posture against. And we use ground force reactions to push against. And that's all part of the learning process. So we learn to deal with this conundrum called gravity. And again, it all feeds into this, that the majority of neurodevelopment is learning. For humans, it's not the same for animals. Animals are kind of hardwired. They can get up and walk almost immediately. They have no apprenticeship. They just do it because it's hardwired. Ours is not. It takes us, on average, 15 months to learn to walk. And if you're in an impoverished environment, you might not. So, anyway, that's enough of that. Yes, you've got to have the box.
Sort of off topic, sort of going along with what you were talking about in terms of development.
Yeah.
For example, in Japan.
Yes.
We were actually having this discussion when I was over there. Anyway. A lot of Japanese kids will be pigeon-toed. Like a high proportion will be pigeon-toed. Now, I used to think that was because a lot of the kids are born bow-legged, but nowadays they're not. But they're still pigeon-toed.
Ah, right.
There's a lot of people who are still pigeon-toed.
Yeah.
So
I wonder why.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you don't know.
I don't know. No, I don't know.
I was just wondering if there's anything that might have come up with that, because it was just interesting to note that, and sometimes with the kids, the older kid would be and the younger kid wouldn't, if you're watching brothers and sisters. And
part of the apprenticeship is copying. You're going to say, sorry.
Imitating what they see.
Yeah. Copying is a big part, imitation is a big part of learning, and we don't allow it in here. You're not allowed to look at each other because you might copy someone's pigeon toes. So because we're all about the inner business, your own internal thing. You don't copy me. God, please, God, don't copy me. But anyway, yes, maybe copying. Maybe the way they're sitting. The other thing, if you're sitting cross-legged a lot, you get pushed into inversion a lot, which is not necessarily pigeon-toed, but yeah, that might be something else. So the current thinking in neurodevelopment it allows space for culture and environment to influence development in a way that the old theories did not. That's the point. So, it means environment and parenting matter, culture matters, as well as heredity.
So I've got to take the blame?
Yes, a little bit. Shared responsibility, I think it's called, Glenn, not blame. Shared responsibility.
Not my son's called.
Yeah, look, I just say to the kids, yeah, I'm putting money aside for your therapy. Like, just don't bother me with it, you know. The inheritance will deal with the therapy costs. It doesn't matter. All right, so let's see what I used to think about muscle tone. Motion signals life. Do we like that? Yep. So if something's not moving, chances are it might be dead. Or asleep. No, but if they're asleep, they're moving because they're breathing. We have a fluid body. So we were talking about fluid yesterday with someone with Zoran's Guzzi workshop, let's call it. With a restless mind, and we can move and we can contemplate, and motion fulfills ambition and expresses emotions and ideals. Wasn't I young and naive and philosophical back then? Click.
What did you mean?
Oh, we can move, we can act, and then we can stop and repose and contemplate. Or maybe we can move and contemplate at the same time. Maybe that's what I mean. Is that a good answer?
I mean, I just wanted to pick those two things up.
Oh, I can't remember. I'll leave that for you to decide. We can move forward by pushing against ourselves backwards. Controversial or not? Think about it. Nope. We have around 600 muscles to do this, operating the levers formed by bones. Anyone want to challenge and count the muscles? Nope.
They did find that recently found a new muscle, didn't
Did they?
they? Yes.
Where?
I don't know. Something.
Sorry? Fifth, okay. Now, see, this is what always I find, you know, it's such, anatomists are so conceited, because when, you know, I was lucky enough to still be in the generation where we did a full body dissection. And when you dissect a human body, you look at the muscles and you go, well, who decided that is the medial head and that is that? I mean, sometimes it's kind of obvious, but really it's not. I mean, these things blend into each other, and it's, you know, like the geographical map of Europe, you know, like what you saw, the boundaries for Europe when you're a kid at school are no longer the boundaries, right? And you look at muscles in a real human body, in a cadaver, and you think, well, it's pretty arbitrary the way we decided. Is it? So, yeah. And so in some people, a muscle that, you know, where, you know, you might have deltoid that's got these sort of, meant to have these three distinct areas. They're not that distinct, actually. And I just think, is it just because someone's shifted, you know, Poland, poor Poland. Is it just like Poland? They just keep messing with the borders, you know? But maybe, anyway. All right, so let's say there's around 600 plus or minus. In the limbs, each muscle attaches to 2 bones. Right? Is that clear? If a muscle only attached to one bone, couldn't move anything, right? Otherwise the bone would fracture. It would create its own joint, right? So muscles have to cross over a joint. So that means they're attached to 2 bones. And that those bones are hinged by a joint. Or some muscles actually don't attach to the bone in between. They attach to a bone one side, then there's another bone, and then there's a third bone. And so they operate over two joints, right? So the 2 joint muscles. When a muscle shortens, the hinge swings open or shut depending on the position of the muscle. Is that true in your experience? Yep, so you can all think of an example. Muscles can work for fast spurts, they can accelerate, they can work for endurance and stamina, or for agility, or for stability, for strength, or finesse.
What does finesse?
Finesse means dexterity with accuracy. And the accuracy, finesse also sort of hints that there's a bit of gracefulness. Finesse is like, it's not only accurate, but it's graceful, or might look good or feel good. Is that a good definition? Anyone know? Okay. Historically, Aristotle first described muscles produced rotary motion of bones about joints, and this becomes translatory. So what do I mean by that? So actually, if you look at a muscle working on a joint, it can only produce a a rotation around that axis. So let's say this elbow joint, and I've got a muscle. Biceps is a bit complicated, but let's say there's one that comes from here and here, brachioradialis or whatever it is. So it comes from here, goes to there. So if it shortens, it will close that hinge. So it's making this bone rotate around the axis of that joint, right? So that's what we mean by rotation, as opposed to a rotation in somewhere else. It's just a technical thing. So rotation. Now, if I want to translate, a translation movement is not rotatory, it's linear, it's moving through space. So if I push my hand like this through space, it's moving in a line, but it's happening because there's a rotation movement here and here and here that becomes a translation movement. So and these words are important because we'll talk about a translation movement when we're giving our file, when we're demonstrating something. Have you had an example of when someone said we translate the head, or we translate? Means we move something in a straight line, but it's actually a slight illusion. It's happening because there's a whole series of joints rotating around themselves. Is that clear? Okay. Galen dissected muscles and described agonists and antagonists with this idea of contraction. So do we know what agonists and antagonists are, apart from in a theatrical sense? Yeah, it could be a flexion and extension. So what do they actually mean?
One's working and the other one's following.
Opposing. Has the potential to oppose it. Yeah, it's antagonist, opposite to it. Yeah. And this idea of contraction. So the way a muscle produces a force is that it gets shorter. That's the beginning of an idea of contraction. Leonardo da Vinci wrote, "Motion is the cause of all life." Oh, so I didn't make up that first statement. I got it from Lenny. Oh, it's the cause of all life. Do we want to dispute that? Well, we can't argue with a dead man, can we? All right. He drew the body, obviously, and he drew it beautifully, and he analysed the machinery and described the relationship between. So COG is centre of gravity. So any physical body has a centre of gravity. The point is the theoretical point about which gravity is said to act. So that's the centre of gravity. And the base of support, BOS, is what?
How the gravity's coming through.
It's literally our base. It's what our support base is. So Danielle's base of support is, if I may be so bold, your bum, the back of your thighs, and your right foot. That's your base of support. Whereas Karen's is both buttocks, back of both thighs, and her calves, and slightly to her heels. That's what her base is. Right? That's the base of her at the moment. It's what's taking her weight. Okay? So the size of the base of yours, well, maybe we'll go through that in some other... You have had that? Base of support? Centre of gravity? So your centre of gravity, the line from that has to fall within your base of support. Because if it doesn't, that's called falling over. So he understood that. And he understood that the muscles played a role in this relative to their position. He also understood that they worked in pairs, like Galen did with the agonist-antagonist business. And he's introduced this, that they contract and lengthen. So they can shorten and lengthen. So you can see the progression of ideas, right? Yes? Click. Borelli, after Galileo, considered Jenny Evans, according to that, considered thank you, human body's mass, weight, etc., and looked at how muscles contract. And he thought that they were fueled by some sort of chemical reaction, perhaps animal spirits. It's great reading this stuff. Someone else, Descartes, thought that the soul resided in the pituitary gland. And he thought that was this receiver of spirits as well. It was Descartes. Anyway, someone funny. Do you see what I mean, though? Like, things change, right? Ideas change. Next. Nothing. Nothing after Borelli. We have to stay with the animal spirits. Click. No click? Not happening. Oh, wait. Whoop. Oh, there we go. There's a picture of the animal spirits. Animal spirits propelled from the brain through tube-like nerves generated muscle movements. Descartes said this too. Theory of reflex action. He was full of shit, Descartes. A lot of rubbish comes from that man in his treatise of man. Aroused by the fire, sensory organs in the foot pulled on delicate threads in the nerves, drawing animal spirits towards the muscles. Descartes mistakenly believed this contraction was the result of a muscle's inflation. That's when you get pumped up. When your muscles are pumped. Yeah, is it? Pumped up muscles. Glisson, a British physician, showed muscles contract, not expand. Thank you very much. And von Haller from Deutschland, that they do this because of their inherent properties, not because something outside fuels them. That's very good. Baglivi, can't remember where he's from. Where do you reckon? Italian? I don't know. Differentiated between smooth muscle for sustained work and striated muscle for sudden action. This is the beginning of this sort of obsession with red fibre and white fibre. But now we would actually describe smooth muscle fibres as being in the vegetative kind of organs. So smooth muscle in bowels, bladder and stuff like that. And striated is skeletal muscle. So there's a bit of confusion here, right, about what's happening. In the late 18th century, Galvani, so I presume that was Mr. Galvani who does the stimulus, the electrical dude, was electrically stimulating muscles. There you go. Duchenne was using electrical stimulation to treat muscle pathology. So they started to realise that there was something about electricity that could fire off muscle shortening. And those of us who trained last century, as I did, we did a lot of galvanic stimulation. Because we like to. You, my vintage Lisa, did you do a lot of galvanic stimulation? In the baths, galvanic baths, yep, beautiful. Next, Bowditch proposed all or none principle for muscle contraction. Number of fibres contract is, yes, we get that. Sherrington was the dude who's a cat lover. If you love cats, you don't love Sherrington because he did nasty things to cats. But Sherrington was also responsible for the hierarchical and reflex theories because they came out of an animal model, right? And another reason to not think of them too seriously in relation to human beings. He showed that, so he was a neurophysiologist, I think he was a physician actually as well, but anyway, that neural impulses can cause a contraction in the agonist and inhibit the antagonist. So this is an interesting idea. Well, it's not an idea, it's a wiring that we have. That if you test my stretch reflex, so you do that, I can inhibit, I'm so low tone it's not there, let's say that. So I stretch the muscle, I get a reflex contraction in my quads. At the same time, there was a little reflex loop that by the gamma system that inhibits my antagonist to that, my hamstrings, so that I don't have two muscles fighting each other. So my hamstrings are told to shut up in order that my quads can fire. Okay, and that's called reciprocal inhibition. So when one muscle works, theoretically, it's telling the other opposite muscle to be quiet. And that makes sense. Doesn't always work, but it can. Current additions to that. A muscle is a machine for motion. Electron microscopy allowed for identification of individual muscle cells within muscle fibres. That these are elongated cylinders containing several nuclei, so several little mini brains, if you like. That they can be quite large, up to 25 centimetres long, or they can be quite small for little tiny muscles in our hands, for example. The fibres are bundled together, which produce muscle fascicles. The fascicles are bundled together to produce muscles. So there's a cell within cells within fibres, fibres within fascicles, fascicles within muscles, etc. So that's that. You don't need to know any of that. Click, click. Oh, now that's a striated muscle fibre under electron microscopy. They're quite beautiful, aren't they? Don't you think? You don't think? No? Bad paint job. So the striation, this skeletal muscle, comes from the way the fibres line up. Anyway, it's another story. So muscle fibre types. So this was kind of slightly understood, but there's actually 3 muscle fibre types. I'm not going to talk about the smooth muscle because that's in gut. That's involuntary. Actually, there's 4. Cardiac muscle fibres is the 4th one. I'm not going to talk about that either. We're talking about skeletal muscle, 2 main categories, and there's a continuum in between. There's the fast twitch, they might be called white muscle fibres, or they're called type 2, or they're called anaerobic because they don't need as much oxygen, and they are good for strength and power. Power is strength produced over time, so it's quick strength or slow strength, so they contract quickly. Slow twitch or red or type 1 or aerobic are steadier, more enduring. You can decide your personality. Are you a red fibre or a white fibre? Are you there for the long haul? Are you the plodder? You just keep going, low energy intake, you just plod, get through? Or are you the fast twitch, prima donna, suck up all the oxygen, all show? For biblical people, the Mary or the Martha? You can decide. Who knew muscles could be personality inventories? Different muscles have different ratios of these types. Now, Feldenkrais talks somewhere, I can't remember which, it might even be this current Amherst teachings. Earlier in his career, it was very much thought that muscles were either red fibres or white fibred muscles. So muscles were either for endurance or for speed, and not both. It was only when, I'm echoing a little bit, do I have to move? When they were able to look at muscles more clearly with electron microscopy, but they realised that muscles have both. They just have different ratios. And the ratios actually differ from one person to another. So again, you might have been taught that, one muscle group is predominantly this and another is that. The evidence for that is getting weaker and weaker because it's quite individual. The point to remember is that we have these kind of characteristics, that muscles can work in these 2 different ways. So they can be slow, steady. Who would you want to marry? A red fibre or a white fibre? Now, see, young girls, we want to marry the white fibres. We all show we want to marry the carny guy, don't we? No, you've got to marry the red fibre. It's my little advice to you. Oh, you're all fine, but it's my advice to you. Okay. You want to pass the box? Where's the box? You want some marriage counselling? Both, yes. The answer to that is yes. Hereditary, yes. Environment, yes. So environment meaning how do you train? How do you spend your early life? What do you do? So it's changeable. It's relatively, it's plastic. It can change, is the current thinking.
That's only pretty new, right?
Very new. Very new. Yeah, not.
That's just how you built.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Pardon? You can change the ratio, apparently. I'm not exactly sure of the mechanism of it, other than that the conditions are around the way you train changes. So you train to be a sprinter or you train to be an endurance runner. And there's obviously the systemic issues, that you train your heart and your lungs to support that function. But the muscle morphology changes relative to your training experience. So there's this thing about, that Kenyans are really good at long distance running because they're Kenyans, because that's the way they're born, that's the way they are, and all the evidence is it's the way they spend their life. The kids have to run to school, for example, or whatever it is. Or why are Afro-Americans in America, why are they so good at basketball? because they're built that way, they're just really naturally good at basketball. Nah, it's because basketball's really cheap to play. You know, it doesn't, any neighbourhood can have a ring and a basketball. And, you know, historically, and this is just a theory, historically, you know, African Americans were poor, they couldn't afford to play tennis, so they played basketball. So that's why there's a lot of really good American. Yeah, well, who knows? I don't know.
Well, they tend to play a lot more sport because they don't have the funds necessarily for other things.
Yeah, yeah. So there's this theory that yeah, that's right. It's the sports that are cheap that they're good at because they can do it, because they can afford it. They, you know, they're not, you know, yes, there's Tiger Woods who plays golf, but there's not a lot of black dudes playing golf in the States because they couldn't afford it. An interesting theory could get turned on its ass next week, couldn't it? Is there
The world's best high jumpers are white.
Yeah, look, it's interesting, you know, the nature-nurture debate will go on forever. You know, what's nature and what's nurture? It will go on forever. And if this was an academic environment, you would have written 4 essays already on nature versus nurture. You already have. It's a great debate, always will be.
Wasn't there research that pointed to muscle insertion points being between jumping?
Bones are plastic too. i.e. they can change depending on how you use your body. So yeah, you're born with a certain anthropometry, but there's some very speedy little short asses. You don't have to be long of limb to be speedy. Now, so that's enough about muscles. How does the nervous system something relate? I wonder what's behind Jenny Evans in that little box there. Do you think it's an important word or not? And, no, it wasn't an important word. Okay. All right, so the output there, motor, so you might hear you might read about motor units. So a single axon, so that's a single outreaching fibre from a neuron. So a neuron is the sort of structural unit of the nervous system. The cell has a little fibre coming out, that's its output pathway, right? So that comes and has a relationship with a motor neuron. Yeah, so in the motor neuron, which is also another neuron, right, in the spinal cord. And then that has a relationship with with a group of muscle fibres. And that is called the motor unit, the motor neuron and the muscle fibres. And how many fibres any one motor neuron supplies varies from muscle to muscle. So a big, fat, dumb muscle like gluteus maximus would have a lot of fibres per axon because it's not very dexterous. All right? Gluteus are not finely tuned. Whereas a little fine muscle in our hand would have less fibres per axon because it's much more able to be dexterous and controlled, right? So it changes from one muscle to another. And we have a whole bunch of motor neurons. And so when we contract a muscle, what you're doing when you're doing a repeated thing like this is that you're cycling around your motor units. So you'll use a couple of motor units for a while you're doing this, and then they'll have a rest and you recruit some different motor units. And then they'll have a rest while you recruit other ones, and it cycles around so they have a spell. Now, if you did a maximum contraction, like if you work really hard, then you're probably recruiting all of your motor units, and there's no reserves on the bench, so you get tired and or pain, right? So there's something about when you are working submaximally, and this thing I'm banging on about with sustaining is this is what you're doing. You're reusing, recycling, restoring, because you're not working maximally. And this is a really important point for people to, well, you don't have to understand this theory of it, but you understand the experience of it, right? And it's really important. That's the difference between you pooping your forearm muscles out and not. So who didn't poop their forearm muscles out today compared to Monday? Yeah. So this is what you've learned to do. You've learned to not over-recruit. It's very, very important. You know, if half of our clients learned to do that, they would not be in the pain and troubles that they're in. Bad boy. What word?
All. Maximum effort doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Almost all.
I'd say that's not even that. I agree with it. It's not even that. It's just it uses so many that recovery is different.
Okay.
So it's pretty important for your weight.
Yeah. Why do you lift weights?
Sorry?
Big question. Don't start. It might, yeah. Because it is the so what factor, isn't it? Fiona and I wondered. Oh, no. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So we have resting and we have active motor units. And let's say when we're contracting maximally, we're not allowing enough motor units to be in reserve. How does that go? Oh, it didn't bulk that. That's fine. Snuck that one through. Central nervous system, CNS, central nervous system. So that means the brain and most of the spinal cord. Varies the contraction or the force according to the task. Now, this is an important thing because often what people do is that they don't vary the force or the contraction. They over-contract, sometimes under-contract. Yes? So this is what you're learning to do. So when we say reduce the effort, that's what we're actually asking you to do. It's a neurological decision. All right? And you learn to do it better through paying attention. According to the task and by varying the total number of active units or varying the frequency of activation. So it's a very physiological thing that you're doing here. When we say reduce the effort, it's a very, very real thing. The neuromuscular junction is the point where the motor neuron and the muscle fibre meet. I think I've got a picky of that. Click. Yes. So there's an axon coming in and branching, and then it branches again and again. So it's quite arboreal. And then those red things running that way are muscle fibres. So don't you think that's rather beautiful? Quite floral. Not arboreal, floral. Okay. So muscles have feelings too. Yeah. That's right. Now you know this because of what all the comments that you guys said this morning about having somebody touching your muscles, right? You sensed something when somebody touched your muscles, and it wasn't necessarily your skin telling you that. Your muscles were picking up stuff because they've got feelings. So they have associated structures that send, now this is where I'll probably change my language, they send proprioceptive input to the central nervous system. And these little associated structures are other fibres between the muscle fibres. They're called muscle spindles, or they have their own fibres actually. These muscle spindles are like super strain gauges. So a strain gauge, you know when you buy those things, you know when you've got your luggage when you're travelling, and you buy a thing that tells you how heavy it weighs. So, you know, it's like a little pulley thing and you hang your luggage on there and it gets pulled down relative to how heavy the luggage is. That's a strain gauge. So you can imagine that a muscle spindle is a little bit like that. The more a muscle gets pulled, it gets lengthened, the more it picks up the amount of strain that the muscle's on. That's what a muscle spindle is, very simplistically. But it's more than that. So when a muscle length is changed, that little gauge is pulled or shortened, and the amount that it's pulled or shortened, it sends the relative impulse via the gamma system to the brain, and the brain goes, okay, now I know what that muscle's doing. And you do this, shut your eyes and just bend. So you know where your elbow is, mostly because your muscle spindles are saying, the biceps and other flexors are here, therefore your arm must be there, and then here, and you know the difference because of the length of the muscle. So there's nothing in the skeleton that tells you where you are. Sorry to tell you that, there's nothing in the bones.
How does that work when you're like the idea of you holding something?
Yeah, so it tells you static. It tells you static, yeah. So they're not just strain gauges, because they will tell you what the static length is, because they're registering. Yeah. Yeah. So whether they're accelerating or decelerating or doing neither, the brain will pick up the lack of signal in a way. To pick up the stationary tension, or the static tension in the muscle.
Sorry, no, what I meant was like the distance between holding, say, that, or
yeah,
and it'll still, like at the moment I know my fingers are here.
Yeah.
If I'm holding something, that's taking the length out further. That's still the same system.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, if I'm holding a stick, I can still hit someone with the end of the stick.
Yeah.
I close my eyes and still.
Yeah. Yes, because your biceps and all the other muscles are still telling you where they are.
So it's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the end of the stick. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't. But. Oh, okay. So yeah, then you get, yes. So this is a really interesting thing neurologically. As soon as you have a tool in your hand, like OTs love this stuff, the tool becomes part of you. And so if I touch something, like I'm blind and I've got a white stick and the end of the stick touches the floor, I will pick that up, but I'll pick that up with my tactile receptors in my hand.
So it's a different system.
A different system, yes. No, sorry, I didn't understand. But it's a marvellous thing, isn't it? The brain will adopt a tool and take it. Yeah, it's marvellous. Just like when you're sitting in a car, you feel the bumpy road from the tyres. It's like our nervous system adopts that whole system and will compute what the tyres are transmitting up through our bum. Fran, your anus can pick up more than you think. Now, these muscle spindles are extraordinary. They're absolutely extraordinary because they're not just a strain gauge that just reacts to things. We can make them more or less sensitive. And this is really important for us as Feldenkrais practitioners. We can make them more or less sensitive through learning. Yes. They have their own little fibre tract and they're embedded within or between the muscle fibres. So I don't know if I've got a picture, I can't remember, but I can find a picture. So yeah, so you have, a whole series of muscle fibres like this, and then the next fibre will actually have a muscle spindle within it and its own little muscle fibres at the end, which can make it more or less sensitive. And this is where learning comes in, that we can make our muscles more or less sensitive depending on what we pay attention to. Yes. Do you want to say it in the box? It's really quick, I can repeat it. That's proprioception. So the muscle spindles are the primary proprioceptors. So muscles have feelings. Muscles not only move, but they sense their own movement. And this is really important. Got this, we have to put in, Grant's got this dickhead reviewer who said, I think you're confusing sensory impairment with motor impairment. And I wrote back saying, no, I am not confused. If you've got a motor impairment, you have to have a sensory impairment. Because if your muscle is not contracting normally, you are not sensing normal. You're not sensing normal. And I felt really smug about that. And guess what? I won't get the money because they don't like smug. Anyway, there you go.
Susan?
Yes.
So it's proprioception function of the muscles of the tactile.
So now this is where it gets confusing, and maybe we'll have another talk about the different sensory receptors. So I've chosen to cut the sensory receptor pie in a certain way, according to a rather delightful French neurophysiologist who I have a thing for. We can talk about that. Other people use different descriptors. But let's say proprioception is mostly muscle spindle. Proprioception is the sense of where we are, the position in space and movement in space. Two things.
Does that, just to understand, does proprioception includes the tactile?
No.
Or is proprioception just what you
Proprioception is just the sense of position and movement through muscle, not through tactile. So you can get a kinesthetic sense. That's the sense of the overall movement through tactile as well. So if I do that, I can feel my hand moving. I can sense it through the tactile receptors. But I'm using proprioception as well. I'm just sticking to the Latin of kinesthetic is the all of movement. Proprioception is positional.
So is it only internal?
These are all intrinsic, yep. Internal. Golgi tendon organs, look, I think the thing to say is that we just really don't know what they do, and everyone thinks that they know, and I've been pulled up. I say one thing at a conference, and, a neurophysio, I say, no, you're wrong, and then I'll say that at the next conference, and they say, no, you're wrong. So I've given up. I don't know what they do. They're in tendons, so they're not in the contractile muscle fibre. They're in the sinewy bit that you spit out when you're eating it. They obviously detect some change in muscle tension, and there was one suggestion that they're kind of the brake, that if the tension is too fast and too unexpected, that they're the ones that will fight. Let's just say that. But like I said, I've been pulled up a lot about that.
So is proprioception always dynamic?
Is proprioception always dynamic? No, you can pick up static. So if I'm still, I can still pick that up. Yes.
So I can tell I'm on this chair, feel it tactilely, but I can tell my thighs are fine.
Yes, because of the state of your muscles. Yes. They all work together. Yeah, which is why they get chopped up and described in different ways, because they work together. Click. All right, how are we going? Is this enough theory? Do you want to stop here or do you want to keep going?
Go.
Okay. So have you done this isometric or isotonic business? No? So think of the Latin. Iso means the same. Isometric means that the length doesn't change, so meter length, let's say. An isometric contraction means that the muscle is contracted. So do it. Contract your biceps. This is a Popeye thing. So you see my biceps here hasn't changed length, but you can feel it. Feel its liveliness, if you like. It's really, or tightness or active. It's really active. Then you can relax it. Or more, so that is an isometric contraction. It's not changing length, but it's still working. All right. So if you push against something like that, that's isometric. I'm not moving. If I don't move, I'm not moving. It's not changing length. But it's still working. So you can have a muscle working that's not changing length, or you can have a muscle working that is changing length, which is the isotonic contractions, and they can work either by, so if you put your hand on your bicep, so here, when we've been feeling muscle tone, let your arm go really floppy and feel what a floppy muscle feels like, so it's not lively, if your arm's really dangling, and now contract, bend your elbow a little bit up, feel that the muscle gets more and more, whatever you like to call it, hard, lively, whatever. Yes, it's getting shorter. So that's a concentric, i.e. shortening, with the centre, means concentric, shorter and shorter, and moving the arm that way, right? And then it's at its shortest, let's say, for argument's sake, like this, right? So it's the most bunched up. And the way a muscle contracts is it's got these little fibres within the fibres, and they've got little feet between them, and they actually walk like this along each other, little cross bridges they're called, and so that the muscle ends up like that. So a lengthened muscle is like that, and a contracted muscle goes like this, and then it's like this. So that's why here the muscle feels quite flat, and here the muscle feels quite fat, because it's like this now instead of this. Is that clear? Yes.
So when people are more stretching,
Yeah. And does that make sense? In no way. Yeah.
and then building all of those to say bigger. There's quite a few different mechanisms the way a muscle gets stronger, and I'd have to go and read up about it because it's a long time since I've done muscle stuff. But yes, basically the cross bridges get stronger. You get more, fibres get stronger at that contraction thing. Now you have to ask yourself, if you've got all these little cross bridges doing this, does it make sense to rip them apart to stretch them?
Perfect. Oh, sorry, no.
So when your muscle gets tense and locked in,
Yeah.
does that mean that it's held there?
Yeah.
How would the muscle relax?
Yeah. The cross bridges are locked in, and this is a cramp. And it hurts when it's like this because then it's holding so tightly, it's very difficult for the blood to get to it, let's say, very simplistically. And it's making all this poo, and it's very hard for the poo to go away. Is that a good way of saying it, Glenn? Yes? No, ask it in a circus way, I don't care.
If you're letting yourself down,
Yes.
is it actually the same?
No. Good question, because that's eccentric.
Yeah, but the main way saying use practice is be able to do that. So how why do they is it just like sensible?
Look, the thing we understand now is that this thing called task specificity. So if I want to practice getting better at concentric contraction like this, I practice concentric contraction. If I want to practice an eccentric contraction, which is this, so now put your hands on your biceps when it's really short, and now feel it, slowly lower your arm, slowly. It's still active, right? It's still lively all the way down. And then it goes not lively, floppy. So that, the reverse contraction is you like this, and then the little cross bridges go relax, hold, relax, hold, relax, hold, relax, hold, relax, hold, relax, hold. So it's a contraction with that kind of step. So when you're not used to doing it, you feel like those of you who've got if you can put your foot up really high, like really dorsiflex your foot up really high and hold it there for a while, and now slowly lower it. Does it feel like a smooth lowering? No, you can actually feel the yeah, that's what you feel. The So resistance is you're just producing even more force. So you can lower with resistance. So I can put a really heavy weight in my hand and eccentrically lower with resistance. We've always got resistance. In this instance, my resistance is the weight of my forearm and hand. So there's always resistance. Now, we're actually lowering and raising where it's gravity is the thing that's producing the resistance because my arm has a mass. So if I just add another weight to it, I've got more weight. Gravity sucks even more, so I have to work even harder. Oh. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, so it could be that their muscles aren't allowing you to. They're not letting go. They're not getting floppy. So that, with this no-tone business, yeah, the muscles are hanging on and they're not letting themselves be passively lengthened. Okay, so this is active shortening and active lengthening. Yeah. Okay. Now, here, the muscle is technically relaxed, right? If your arm is absolutely dangling and but there's still, if I put an EMG on it, it'll still have a little bit of electrical activity. But if I have a paralysed arm, there won't be, and it will feel different. So anyone ever picked up somebody's arm that's completely paralysed? And it does not feel like a sleeping person. Well, if someone's really deeply relaxed when they're sleeping, it can feel a little bit similar. But a paralysed arm that has no electrical activity in the muscle at all is a very different beast, isn't it? It's heavy. It feels dead. Neurologically, it is dead. So that thing that you feel in this biceps, that has a little bit of push in it, is what we call resting tone. Yeah? Unless anyone thinks that if there's no resting tone, it's flaccid, which would only exist if you are sleeping or denervated, like there's no nervous impulse. So in a muscle, therefore, there is always this, I'm sorry to keep using the word, this liveliness, that the muscle is always sending this little kind of very quiet background priming signal to the muscle to say, just be a little bit awake, alert but not alarmed. It's the John Howard signal, all right? Just be alert but not alarmed. That's like evoking a ghost from the past, isn't it? All right, as opposed to
the muscle being completely asleep, as it were. All right, so that's resting tone. So all of you have resting tone in all your muscles now. This state of readiness. Yes? Fiona? Box coming.
Do you then take it further to describe low tone?
Yes, I could. So this state of readiness comes about with a healthy nervous system. Click. Just seeing how what Dan's nervous system is in a state of readiness. Yes, it does seem a bit quiet, doesn't it? Click. Okay, I'll get to low tone, Fiona. It's coming, I'm pretty sure. I don't know that we need to worry about this too much. Okay, so there is a passive tension as well. So there's a stickiness in the muscles. This is more... okay, there's a couple of things going on here. So muscles are also vaguely elastic. So there's the soft tissue structures within a muscle are vaguely elastic. So it has a passive resistance as well. So this might speak to you a little bit. So we have this active resistance that a muscle is not allowing itself to shorten. It's maintaining a contraction. But there is an inherent elasticity, a passive property in the muscle because it behaves like an elastic material. So that when it gets long, like really long like that, you will feel increasing resistance at the end of range and its outer range because it has this elastic thing that just wants to kind of spring back a little bit. Yes? Does that make sense? So there's an active tension in the muscle and there's a passive tension. The active tension is built up from the nervous system. The passive tension is simply when a muscle is fully stretched. It will be elastic and it will want to spring back a little bit. I don't know if that's useful or not. Okay, click. So what influences tone? Tone is the background or resting amount of neural activity to an organ or tissue. What can influence this background liveliness? External and internal factors. So what influences your muscle tone externally from an external point of view? Heat and cold. So there's a reason why when we're cold, our muscle tone increases. It increases the activation. We can even get a shiver because that generates heat and it warms us up. So that increased tone is important for thermal regulation. And there's a reason why when you're hot, you get very limp because you're trying to not generate that internal heat. What else increases or decreases your muscle tone? Depression? Pressure? What sort of pressure? Like emotional pressure or pushing pressure?
I was thinking actually about
gravity. Yes. So gravity is something that we're kind of very we want to work against. You know, it's the resistance that we've known since birth, prior to birth, and it's a force that we learn to work against. So our postural tone. Very much we learn to use that sort of postural tone in our postural muscles to hold us against gravity. So gravity is a big driver of... and so this is a problem with people in outer space where there isn't gravity and they don't contract, they don't have enough resistance to work against and their muscles and their bones get very weak. Very weak. What else external?
Cortisol.
Oh yeah, it can ramp you up. Yes. Yes, so vigilance. And that's quite autonomic, that we become more vigilant. So cortisol is part of that axis as well, but we become more vigilant. So we raise our general tonus, because we might want to either fight or flight, right? We're more ready to turn around our axis and we're more ready to respond. So our nervous system ramps us up generally in order to be able to respond. Yep. So vigilance and therefore stress. Yeah, all of those things. Stress is not always a bad word. Anything else ramps you up or ramps you down? There's some obvious ones. Yep. Yes. Yes. Yes, and did you feel that yesterday in the calf when you made somebody stand on their toes? So they were relatively unstable, and could you all feel that the calf started getting quite tricksy, right? It was wobbling in and out a lot. It was working much harder. Okay? Yep. So distractions are good at... what else? There's some obvious ones that decrease tone. Fatigue does, yes. Sleep absolutely decreases tone. We actually decouple our voluntary control when we go into a certain stage of sleep. There's, it's almost like a switch that flicks off. When you fall asleep and you jump, that's that moment that you can actually, you relax so completely that you might drop, and then that actually wakes you up. Alcohol, come on you guys, don't you drink? Alcohol, oh did you? Yay. Oh right, it was just I didn't hear, sorry. Why is it us Susans always go to alcohol? Because we do experience this. Yeah, we've seen it, we've observed it. So alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. It depresses the nervous system. So therefore it relaxes the muscles. The muscles don't get as much central drive, so they get floppier. Yeah, marijuana, same thing, antidepressants. See, alcohol is a depressant. Antidepressants technically rev you up a little bit. Technically. They don't, but technically, yeah.
I don't remember the relationship, but she was on them and then she wasn't, and then she couldn't wake up early, like she had to keep sleeping in or something.
Yeah, antidepressants can have a very mixed effect on things. But essentially, the rule is alcohol is a depressant. Now, people think that's odd because they think, oh, I'm more liberated with alcohol. But actually, no, it just depresses your inhibitions. So you're disinhibited and more relaxed. Yeah. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, well, we don't let, when we're doing our experiments with muscle tone, we don't let people have, or our dexterity, we've done a lot of dexterity studies, we don't let people have caffeine because it influences they can have more of a tremor. So I'd always assume that it increases tone, but I'm not sure. It might be one of those paradoxical things. I'm not sure about caffeine. Exercise, yeah. So when you are exercising, your tone increases, right? But then you can have that response afterwards. You feel very relaxed. So that's that sort of post relaxation response, if you like. Yep. Hormones, yes, they can ramp you up big time. What do you mean? What are you laughing at? Music. Now, this is a really interesting one. So I've been prattling a little bit about entrainment, but there's been some great studies around muscle tone, or in general emotional tonus as well, and music and the rhythm of music. And there's they've reproduced these studies a few times where, right, really fast kind of frenetic music, if you play, they play that when people are in driving simulators, and they have a lot more crashes than if it's the Bach, Beethoven type slow thing. So this is the thing, it affects the nervous system because the nervous system entrains to an external rhythm. Well, you're a DJ kind of person, you can change the mood of a party, can't you? These puppet masters, DJs.
They also have done that in train stations for reducing public violence, playing classical music rather than... Yep, behind you.
I suppose a bit like alcohol, food and diet could
affect it.
Like
so
high blood sugar could increase tonus.
Well, all that glucose kind of stuff, and then there's the glucose with the cortisol business. And this is getting outside of my territory, but some of the mindfulness techniques are now looking at this HPA axis, which is the cortisol, glucose. I don't know. I read about it and I don't know. It ramps people up or it ramps people down. That's all I know.
Up or down?
Yes.
Do you want to pass it?
Okay. It's coming, Glenn.
I do. I do. When I'm sitting in the front, that's why I sit at the back. That's why I stay at the back. No, because this is actually really interesting for me.
Yeah. As opposed to everything else, which is boring.
Everything else is. I've been bored for the last day and a half. I mean, finally I'm awake.
Yeah.
Now I don't know if it's actually true or not. I'm asking you if you know. Like my understanding, I was reading this article about Dunkin' Donuts with their music, and they have it on a 20-minute cycle. So it starts off slow to keep people comfortable, but then slowly ramps up to get people to leave. Right? So it's on this 20-minute cycle. So if you get in the middle of the cycle, you might skip that bit, but you'll leave within 30 minutes, like to keep customers.
Is that right? I haven't heard that, but it would make sense. It would make sense.
Say it'd be possible then.
I would say
because it's supposed to ramp up near the end, and then you'll see people starting to get up and leave, and you'll have these.
It's the only explanation for elevator music. They just want you to get out of there, don't they? Okay, so we've got external, internal factors. I think we've talked about. Now, in ATM and FI practice, that's the thing that we can contemplate. What's next? I can't remember. Oh, so the tone, it's full spectrum of tone. I want to actually speed up because we've got a lovely ATM with Fran. And it's 3:30.
Poop one.
Is that a poop one? How long do you need, Fran? 45. Okay, so I'll be really quick. So, consider tone in a spectrum. So Fiona's already alluded to this idea of low tone versus high tone. And there's, sort of in some therapies, we talk about people who are generally low toned, people who are generally high toned. So I'd invite you to think about people, there's this kind of background tonus that we have. Now, I've said a few times, most generally, I'm pretty low toned. It's easier for me to fall asleep than to jump up. I tend to be that way more, right? Having said that, within my different muscle groups, if you felt my muscle groups, you'd say I've got, more tone in my traps, for example. That's a postural thing. I keep my shoulders forward. It makes my muscles feel shorter. So it's not like every muscle group in me is low tone, is quite relaxed, more towards the relaxed side of things. But generally, I'm more towards the relaxed side of things. Yes? So remember the very first day I asked you to think about your general emotional tonus, like what's your background mood? So my background mood is actually that I'm quite, at the moment, my background mood is I'm slightly tending towards a little bit, say, sad. It doesn't mean to say that I can't be animated in the moment or, have a happy thought or a happy fleeting thing. Did you all experience that? Do you know what I was talking about? That's an experience. So I'd invite you to think about your emotional tonus and your muscle tonus in the same way, so that we can have this background pervasive, what is our essential trait? And then we can have these more momentary states, which could be in a muscle group or not. And we work with both of these things a lot in Feldenkrais. Now, if we took it to the pathological extreme, so low tone, no tone is paralysed or flail, or maybe then asleep. But we have some tone when we're asleep, otherwise we would, or when you go into really deep sleep and you don't move, and then you feel really kind of stuck when you wake up, or you've slept in a really awkward position. No, mostly we monitor that when we turn and we move, because we're monitoring it at a certain level, depending on which kind of sleep. Through to very relaxed, so let's say that's me, versus someone who's kind of, in that more equipoise, where you're just ready to fall asleep or go for a run. Or the anticipatory, so we're starting to increase, kind of our alertness, if you like. Or very uptight, right, when we really like this, versus very tense. Or in the pathological realm, so these are people that I work with who are living in these extremes, you have spasticity, where the muscle is so overactivated and it's no longer under entire voluntary control. Right? There's some mechanism that's not working, that they can't inhibit, they can't stop activating a muscle. It's working when they don't want to, all right? And that's in the spasticity realm, right? Just like in the paralysis realm, that's gone beyond voluntary relaxation. They cannot ramp up their muscle. It's paralyzed. It's not got an innervation anymore. All right, so we are operating a lot in that middle realm. and we're helping people shift up and down. And thinking about, we're actually teaching people how they can do that themselves, actually. They can change their tonus. You've all felt that after an ATM, your tonus, you feel lighter or you feel this or that. We are mucking around with tonus, either at that state level or at the trait level or both. Yes? Yes, so Carol's thinking about, so she's got a lot of tonus right here, right? And this helps you think. Tonus here. No.
I don't feel relaxed. I don't feel ready. I'm in a totally different state. I'm just thinking it doesn't matter that I don't know how to explain.
Yes.
That was my crowd.
Yes. 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 So actually an absence of low tone or high tone, that equipoise that I would hypothesize is where you have an absence of feeling, because normally you're used to feeling one way or the other. When you don't feel one way or the other, you're in genuine equipoise. You might not feel anything. You just get that kind of, I just am, which is delightful, but can be quite frightening for some people. Fran mentioned that yesterday. For someone who they only know themselves when they're like this and they relax a little bit, it's really scary because they know themselves when they're like this. And when...
That's like, enlightenment is for others.
Yeah, I would say. I would say that. I would say that. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I think we better stop there. Oh, just one more click. Yeah, we've said that. Click. Click. 2 minutes, water in and water out. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on the ATM of your lifetime. You can see them. The last one actually was not very useful. The second to last one just said what I said.